On this long journey to anti-racism, one of the things that I can definitely say about this experience is that I've been supported by many people who have shaped and informed me and guided me. And I think that's something key, the human touch. An example of that would be when I was an undergraduate coming out of a very conservative Cold War San Diego. I get to my undergrad experience, and my first semester, I'm on academic probation, trying to get my act together, and the academic advisor helping students to kind of get themselves back on the path was Carla Trujillo. I will never forget her sitting me down, talking to me, her pad and her pencil. She pointed her pencil at me in a respectful way, and she said, "Alejandro, you have the merits to be here. You aren't having time management problems, but your biggest struggle is you don't know who you are." And that kind of fell on me like a ton of bricks. At first I was upset because, 18-year-old, we know a lot of things at that age. But that really set me on my journey to anti-racism. When Carla Trujillo told me to find myself, she recommended I take ethnic studies classes. And it wasn't just taking a class, it was being immersed in a classroom with students on a similar journey with me, having a knowledgeable professor in the front of the classroom, talking about things that dramatically changed my worldview. And what this professor was able to do, bringing an ethnic studies lens, was able to change my views or help me inform my views. And realize that I didn't have all the story and that I had pieces of a story, but I didn't have the history in terms of what was going on. So for me, the journey to anti-racism is always collective. It's always with other people. It's always guided. It's not something you can do by yourself. And to understand that the work of anti-racism really will make a difference in people's lives. And I think anti-racism isn't this thing you put on a shelf. It's something that you do every day. For some of us, we're at 24/7 thinking about these issues and things. And I think that's what the message of anti-racism would be for me in terms of my life's journey. Some of my friends, even my wife, these are all people that I've come in contact with via anti-racism. It's changed my life. And so if we want to undo the talk, I think it's important to realize when you work in anti-racism that you realize that when our society is made up of different institutions. And the power of racism is that every single institution has its own form of embedded racism and embedded exclusions and embedded kind of orthodoxy of how they view the world. And so for me, it's important for us not to say, oh, we have to change the police and that'll do it. Every institution, everything from schools to churches to hospitals to our criminal justice system, our legal system, government, our corporations, if we are to get rid of the talk, we have to literally change our institutions and remove racist elements, aspects, and ideologies out of those institutions. It is the everyday racism that we do not see, we do not understand, we've in fact normalized, and this is where, from my theoretical, philosophical, and political point of view, it is the normalized racism that people don't realize has to be rooted out. But I think everybody agrees heinous, vulgar racism has to go. But it's the everyday racism, right? Why do we still in Southern California have almost exclusively white suburbs, right? How is that possible in Southern California, right? We're in the stores, we're in the streets, we're at Dodger games or Laker games or Angel games, and you see diversity. But when we leave, we go into our segregated communities, right? So how do we fight that racism that says these communities have more worth because they're not diverse, right? These communities have less worth because they are not diverse, right? And so when we start asking those questions, those harder questions, then we can say we are ready to say we have done enough work and activism and transformation to say to that African American parent, you don't have to have the talk because we've changed all elements of society. Then that's how you can say possibly you won't have to have the talk. When we think about the recent turmoil this past summer regarding the police killings of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I think one of the things that has been inspiring to me as somebody who does not only study ethnic studies but also study social movements, to see people be moved to the point where you actually get off the couch, you get out of your house, you drive somewhere and you get to a protest. The big fear that we have in our society is that we've become so tech savvy that people are comfortable living their virtual realities, playing video games or on social media. But the fact that young people knew to break from that and get out in the streets and create changes. And I think when we look back at this summer, we're going to realize that all those people across the color line, across differences, we're able to unify and do things that are a once-in-a-lifetime type of transformation. We're going to look back and see how this movement of young people and even old people and middle-aged people and children and suburban and urban people, it was everywhere, how that movement shook the country in a way that I don't think we realize it shook us. For the fact that as they were protesting police brutality, all of these signs and symbols of the Confederacy started falling down, right? And people were just kind of like, wait, what's the connection, right? Well, for those of us who do anti-racist work, that is the connection, right? In many ways, these very false idols, if you will, of American history were technically tools of terror. They were technically reminding us that even though these folks lost, we're honoring them. Even though you and your community has been here, we're going to ignore you and continue to make you invisible, right? So there's this contradiction between the statues honoring a racist past, right, and ignoring the histories of people who have also built with their hands and their feet this country, right? We wouldn't have the U.S. if it weren't for the labor and the work and the struggle of all of these communities that we now say are marginalized, excluded, right? It's kind of a weird statement to call us because we've always been here. We've always been part of the U.S. and part of the mix in terms of what has built and created this country, what has built and created the wealth of this country. So when we think about the impact of what those folks who are doing Black Lives Matter, they have changed and begun to change that is going to continue with momentum because in many ways it finally became mainstream, right? You saw it on television, kids' TV shows. You saw even big corporations kind of like, oh, Black Lives Matter. And that is a mixed blessing, while at the same time it demonstrates how things have changed. It's an everyday journey. I wake up on a new anti-racist journey every day. In my home, with my daughter, as well as with my students, and as well as through my activism on social media, trying to get people to be aware of the work that needs to get done. Some of it's tough. It's hard having talks about racism with your child, right? Similar to the talk, but not as life and death, but at the same time, it's horrible explaining to a child who lives in a Disney World kind of childhood that we present for some kids, that there is a lot of bad out there. There's a lot of horribleness out there. And I think it breaks your heart as a parent to have to explain that to somebody, saying that, yeah, these kids probably are not going to go to college because of the economic circumstance, the area code, zip code that they're in. All of those things we know can predict what's going to happen to people. And that is the type of racism that we have to disrupt. So I think when we have these conversations of racism, we have to know that there's just different levels in terms of how you talk to your kids, how you talk to your parents, your neighbors, your friends, your family member, your extended family members. I think that's when we realize that the commitment to be anti-racism is something that I want to impress on people. Is you don't, it's not a piece of clothing that you take off and put on. It's something that, for me, I wear 24/7, 365. I think if I were to look back on my journey and go in a time machine and talk to 18-year-old Alejandro, I would tell him definitely, that part of your mission as an 18-year-old is to realize through the arc of your life, you will be on a constant journey of healing from racism. You'll be healing from the traumas of what that meant in terms of your collective as well as individual identities, and then not to give up. And I just want young people to realize that change happens quickly sometimes, but for the most part it's slow, and it really requires us to be patient. It requires us to be loving, and it requires us to be empathetic to where that person is. That's our everyday work, is that anti-racism isn't just going to happen instantly. We have to be patient and empathetic to others.